Good evening. It's my honor and privilege to this special BW dialogue with a really multifaceted individual. He's somebody who really doesn't need an introduction. A lot of us would have experienced him in some way or the other. But let me welcome our guest today evening, Mr. Kabir Bedi, who's an actor and who's now an author. And he's lived many lives in one life, and I'll talk about that in a while. But let me welcome Mr. Kabir Bedi to the BW Dialogue. Welcome, Mr. Bedi. Good to talk to you.
Hi, Annurag. Thank you for having me on. Delighted to be here. Look forward to a great conversation.
Thank you so much. Mr. Bedi, today the context of our conversation is your maiden book, Stories I Must Tell, The Emotional Life of an Actor, written by you, Mr. Kabir Bedi. So let me hold the book. It's a good book. I read it, and I'm sure you will also find it. Mr. Bedi, if I can call you by your first name, I seek your permission.
Please do. Please do.
Thank you so
I'll
much.
call you Annurag, you call me Kabir.
Of course, I'm much younger to you. And of course, I must tell you that I read the book. I got it a couple of weeks back, and I read the book. And I discovered that you've done two of the things that I do. I did. Which is you were a journalist. How you got the Beatles interview, how you went to Oberoi, and how you really hustled that interview. And second, then you were in advertising. So really, I didn't know this, though I interacted for many years with you. I knew you as a movie star. So tell us, first, how did the book come about? And why did it take you so many years to write the book? Possibly you wanted to be honest, and knowing you're a meticulous person and you try to be honest, give it your best. So clearly you wanted to be very honest, so you kept it for a little late in life. Possibly you should have written it earlier. But why this book now? Give us a genesis.
I came to a point in my life where I realized I just have to write it. Actually, I've been wanting to write it probably for the last decade, actively. And I was distracted by lots of work and travel, etc. But more importantly, I couldn't figure out how I wanted to tell it. I knew I had a great story to tell because it has all the drama of life that you can possibly imagine, from the greatest sorrows to the greatest euphoria to agonies and ecstasies, everything. But I didn't like the linear form. I was born, it just put me to sleep. So when the pandemic began, I had more time to think, I had less distractions, and I realized I have to write it. And I then became clear that I was going to tell it through a series of stories which have their own timeline, which overlap in time, but that gave me the freedom to go back and forth in time, which I think is much more interesting, because then it becomes like a mosaic you're putting together, and people can then put the whole thing together in one piece at the end, and it becomes the totality of my life. So I took my time, but I think it was worth the wait, because the kind of book that emerged with the wisdom I have today, and I'm able to look back on my life and my younger self and other people's younger selves with greater compassion and understanding, and not sparing myself or the others for failings in me or them, but telling it as honestly, as authentically, as candidly as I can.
Thank you so much. I enjoyed reading the book, and as I said, I discovered new, insights about you. But let me start by first asking you. There are 8 chapters in the book. 7 are text, and 8 is a visual chapter, more photographs and the magazine covers that you're in. Let me start with the first chapter, which is Leaving Home with the Beatles, and you call it Boldness and Betrayal. I read the chapter, and how you, as an All India radio, correspondent, you got in, how you got to the manager of the Beatles, and he said to you that he'd give you an interview. And finally, when you knocked on his door at the Oberoi, he took you to the Beatles' room and you sat down and they talked to you. And that in some way kind of started your journey. So give us a sense of your first chapter.
You see, when starting a book, one has to think what would be the best way to draw the reader in. Initially, I thought of chapter 2 as my first chapter, because that promises, love and sex and romance, etc.
There is chances and choices. That's how you met Fatima ji.
So that's a very attractive, seductive kind of opening. But then I thought to myself, it's all very well getting into romances. People don't know who I am. And I thought, starting with the Delhi chapter of my life, with the Beatles interview, which was a transformative turning point in my life, would give people a better understanding of who I was. Because I was working with All India Radio, because I was studying at that time in St. Stephen's College. But because of my parents' highly idealistic lives, there was never much money in the family. So I had to practically work my way through college. And being in All India Radio, when I heard that the Beatles had come into town, this was like the biggest news in the world to me. They were my gods. I was the biggest Beatle fan in India, perhaps. So I was determined to get to them. And I persuaded the bosses at All India Radio to give me a tape recorder, give me the All India Radio badge. And I got into the lobby. And I knew the Beatles had come back from Manila. And they had left Manila in a situation where there'd been a lot of embarrassment because the government got angry with them and threw them out. So I went to the manager and I told him the government has already announced an interview with the Beatles. They must do this, otherwise it'll cause great embarrassment to the Beatles and a big scene with the government. I pressurized him. And he agreed to give me the interview, but he said he'll do the interview. When I reached his room, he was obviously not well.
I know how I read the book and how you met him when he was getting into the car and he said, hop on. Right. And then he said, okay. Because you said the government of India wants to interview the Beatles.
Yeah, I kept stressing the word government. I knew that was his vulnerability. And so that's what got me the interview. I won't get into this magical interview that I had with the Beatles because that you really have to read the book to understand what a wonderful interview they gave me and what a magical moment it was for me, because the Beatles represented the whole 60s, the magical swinging 60s, when the world was changing, when there were people demonstrating on the streets of peace, flower power, the counterculture movement, the pill had been invented, gave people sexual liberation, Carnaby Street and psychedelic clothes were the norm, the Doors, the Pink Floyd, Simon and Garfunkel, these were the sounds of our age. A whole new age was being born. I think the 60s are probably the most exciting decade in the 20th century. And to be growing up in that, to be coming of age in that, was everything that the Beatles symbolized to me. So it was more than just meeting my favorite rock band. It was like meeting symbols of the age in which I was growing up. And the fact that All India Radio didn't value the interview, in fact, taped over it because they didn't have money for new tapes. I understand that the limitations, but taping out an interview with the Beatles was sacrilege for me. And that led me to actually change course and change the course of my life and head to Mumbai to seek a whole new career in advertising, theatre, film, etc.
Yes, and that was almost 55 years back. You were a little more than 19 then, and you still are close to that, but you're 19 then. And clearly, you left your hometown, Delhi. You left your friends here. You also talk in the first chapter that how you grew up with the then powers of India, the then Prime Minister of India, and her two sons were your very close friends, both Rajiv Gandhi and Sanjay Gandhi. And you also talk about the fact that how you went to see Rajiv Gandhi when you became the Prime Minister. And because he was the Prime Minister and knowing the kind of gentleman, and you cross your T's and you dot your I's, in my little interactions over the last 10 years with you, you were trying to be a little, conscious of his position as the Prime Minister and behave in that way. And you said to him that the world is looking at you with a lot of hope. India is looking, and he talked to you and said, that's what everyone tells me. Why you be like that? Be my friend. So give us a sense of how, and then you talked about how you would visit after school, both meet Mr. Rajiv Gandhi and meet Mr. Sanjay Gandhi. Give us a bit from that.
We met at the earliest stages of schooling at the Montessori school near Connaught Place in Delhi, run by a lady called Elizabeth Gauba. And she was a wonderful lady, very inspirational, very creative, brought out most creative things in us. And Rajiv was a year younger, Sanjay was a year younger. And we got to like each other and we became sort of playmates. And I'd be invited to the Prime Minister's house. At that time, Indira Gandhi was just the official hostess to her father, Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, who was the Prime Minister. And she was Auntie Hindu and he was Chacha Nehru, as the whole country called him. And I would play with them in their wonderful playroom where they had train sets and mechano sets, and we'd go riding in horses in Rashtrapati Bhavan and learning all that. We were just pals. We had no idea that these two boys would affect India's destiny so incredibly. And when they grew up and they died in tragic circumstances, I was extremely sorry that they passed, because for whatever the deeds or misdeeds that they were accused of, they were my childhood friends, and I just saw them as friends all along, as childhood friends. They brought back all my childhood memories. So as I mourned their passing.
Yeah. You'll have to read the book to get more, and it's an interesting chapter. Now let's move on. You talk about chances and choices, and you say Kabir and Kishmish in the book, and you write a chance encounter can change your life. Tell our viewers and readers about this journey, this phase of your life. You moved from Delhi to Bombay, you went into advertising, and you were working with the most venerable agency of that time. And
Yes.
give our viewers and readers a sense of what happened then.
Well, in a sense, I was very lucky because my first job was with Lintas. Jason de Cunha was my boss, was a man who I've looked up to all my life. He was not only a brilliant ad man, he had a great social conscience, a great compassionate heart. And Alec Padamsi was my immediate boss, and he was the guru of Bombay theatre. So he was very happy to know that I had acted earlier, etc. And he cast me in Tughlaq, which was Girish Karnad's first play. So the success of Tughlaq was enormous, and that led to film offers, which led me into the film industry, which in turn made me an established actor, which in turn led to the Italians knowing about me. And then I had to go and do a big audition in Rome and win the audition, and got this wonderful role that changed my life. So I can only tell you in the broadest terms the sort of overall geography of that. But in that time, I met Pratima, and I said a chance encounter can change your life, more so if it comes in the form of a beautiful woman, even more so if you decide to resist her and then succumb.
Yes, I read the book, so I know what
opening lines of that chapter. The fact is, Pratima was a very, she was a force of nature. She was like the wind. And she had this ability to enchant everybody. And if she set her mind on you, you didn't stand a chance. And I detail how our romance unfolded, how she saw to it that situations occurred where I kept seeing her, etc., how I got to know her, and how eventually I married her. All that masala is in the book, and it's very exciting, very entertaining. But the fact is, we got together, and we then had a tumultuous relationship after that. That eventually culminated in an open marriage, which then moved on. Then it became something that didn't work for us. And at the end, I moved on, and Parveen Babi entered my life. That's
so let me,
giving you, I'm just giving you the graph of it. I can't. I've got scene by scene all the impossible choices a man is confronted with when in love with a woman who is willful, who is brilliant, who is devious, who is capable of everything. What the choices a man is confronted with and how you do. That's my story, but it's told through the prism of people that I have known and loved.
Okay, brilliant. And you give me a segue into the third chapter. But I enjoyed the fact that once she met you first when you were in the office and you were trying to get into the washroom, you asked
the golden key to the executive loo.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then second time also you went for a concert at Shanmugananda
Hall.
Yes. And then again you found her in the men's toilet.
In the gents.
You asked if you're in the wrong place.
Yes, she was putting glitter on her, and she was going to be a go-go dancer for a rock band.
Yes.
Uh,
So, yeah, so clearly, it was destined for you to meet her and know her and so on and so forth. Now, you give me a segue into the third chapter, which is Days of Love and Glory. And you already taken Praveen Babi's name and you call it Sandokan and Praveen Babi. I cannot pronounce it like you can.
Sandokan and Praveen
Neither.
Babi. Yeah. Yeah, that's the name of
Yeah.
the.
And you say film
It's
stars
called
are
Days
the,
of Love and Glory is the name of the
yeah,
chapter.
yeah, Days of Love and Glory. And you say film stars are the objects of a million fantasies, but they're not objects. They are people with strengths and frailties of the human race. Take our viewers and readers through what is in this chapter. Give us a little bit peep.
Yes, well, essentially, like I said in the opening lines, film stars are glamorized, they are adored, they are admired, they are looked up to, and they're seen as symbols of success, of fame. But at the heart of it, they're as insecure as many, because even the biggest star is afraid of his next film failing. And this is a very slippery slope in this industry. 3 hits and your biggest star can be shaken. And I've seen many come and go on in many continents across from Bollywood to Hollywood. So this chapter is really about my relationship with Parveen Babi, the extraordinary things she was capable of, the mental traumas that blighted her, the intensity of the relationship that we had. Now, how do you describe something that's so emotionally laden? Was my biggest challenge. And she was a bigger star than me in India. But once we got to Europe, and I had the incredible success of the Sandokan television series that made me a huge star in Europe, Beatlemania kind of enthusiasm, that again affected our relationship because she wasn't used to playing second fiddle. And there's a wonderful incident in there where Gina Lollobrigida had invited us for dinner. And we went to her home, and Gina had called her friends, Parveen and I went there. And Gina was introducing me to her friend, and she completely ignored Parveen. And I could feel the temperature rising. I thought, now what am I going to do? And then the plan was after this drinks, we were supposed to go for dinner. So then we went for dinner at this exclusive restaurant with just Gina Lollobrigida, the manager of Air India in Rome, Parveen and me. And Gina Lollobrigida was one of the biggest stars, the only two great Italian stars that were known internationally, Sofia Loren and Gina Lollobrigida. So to be invited to dinner by her was huge. So we went to this restaurant, we sat down, and she said, we sat down, and Gina said, come, let's dance. And so we danced, and I'm thinking to myself, my God, I'm dancing with Gina Lollobrigida. I've made it in life, man. This is just a great moment for any actor to be dancing with one of the biggest stars in the world. We come back to the table. Parveen says, let's dance. So I go off to have a dance with her. Nice dance, meaning it's one of those formal dance bands that you do formal dances, foxtrot, waltz, etc. We're doing a foxtrot. And Parveen says to me, I'm leaving. I said, you're leaving the dance floor? She said, no, I'm leaving. I'm going back to the hotel. I said, you can't go back to the hotel. We're having dinner with Gina. She said, no, I'm going back. I said, but you put me in an impossible position. If I go with you, I insult her. If I don't go with you, I insult you. She said, I don't care what you do. I'm leaving. This woman has not treated me well. So Parveen went back, picked up her bag and walked out. I said to Gina, I'm very sorry, but I have to leave. And I went with Parveen. Those are the kind of incidents that I talk about in my book. Also, I mean, that period of my life, I met some phenomenal people. Federico Fellini, Audrey Hepburn, Bernardo Bertolucci, all these great directors and incredible people with bodies of work, famous around the world, and my interactions with them. And Parveen was sort of with me through that because we went back to Italy. In fact, when I left India, she came with me, and I got her the role in the sequel to Sandokan. And then many other great dramas happened, and I tell in great detail and honestly, what led to the fact that she left me and came back to India, um, and what transpired in our relationship once we separated, and how our parallel lives continued, and how eventually um, she descended into the worst nightmare imaginable.
Mm. When I was reading the book, there's a question I wanted to ask you. And in my more than 10 years of interaction with you, I've seen you to be kind, to be very crossing your T's, dotting your I's, doing your best, uh, try to be literally a gentleman, um, and really put your best into whatever you were doing at that point of time. Now, how did you survive through all this? How did you keep your sanity? That's something I wanted to ask you. I'll go on to the fourth chapter, which is a revolution to religion. But before I do that, I wanted to ask you, how did you maintain your sanity throughout all this?
It was a highly tumultuous, stressful period in my life, because on one hand, I was facing enormous success as my profession. On the other hand, I was facing a catastrophic breakdown of a relationship with a woman who I love deeply. Now, I think once you come to the next chapter of my parents, you understand how that upbringing gave me a lot of strength, and also the fact that in my childhood, accompanying my mother's discovery into Buddhism, I had gone to Burma and been ordained as a Buddhist monk, and had been taught Vipassana meditation by Mahasi Sayadaw, who was the greatest living teacher of Vipassana. And in fact, he's the man who taught Goenkaji, who brought Vipassana to India and taught it to countless people for generations, and helped a lot of people evolve and lift their consciousness. So I think that training in meditation at that early age also gave me a certain inner strength to be able to watch my mind rather than be swayed by it, watch my emotions rather than be swayed by them. Of course, I'm human. I feel the emotions, I feel the pain, but there was an inner resource of strength in me always. And I think that saw me through the worst of times emotionally. And I think I've been able to write about that period with far greater understanding today than I would have, say, 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Because then I would have had far more rage in me. Today I have more understanding.
And gratitude, possibly, that the fact
I'm gratitude,
you were able to get to it.
Yes, and also gratitude for all the trauma that was caused to me by the relationship with Parveen Bhabi. She also gave me many wonderful things. And I have to acknowledge that and thank her for that. But it's not an easy thing to experience. It's not even easy to write about, because you have to revisit those moments. You have to relive those moments, to share them with people, so people know what it is like to live that life and to face those emotional dramas, which are vividly put down by me, so that I take my readers on an emotional journey with me. And that's why I've called it The Emotional Life of an Actor. It's not just a metaphor, it's an actual journey where you accompany me. Absolutely. Through the most important parts. I've left out a lot of unimportant details. I've just stuck to the main meat of the matter. What's the story here? What's the essence of the conflict? What's the essence of the relationship?
People are watching it on Zoom. People are watching it on Businessworld social media handles, which is Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. But there are certain comments coming in. There's a certain comment came which over the years I've thought about. Once I read the book, it got strengthened. Neil Mukherjee is there, Aditya Brahma is there, Sean Mukherjee is there. And Sean Mukherjee is saying such a vast knowledge, Kabir and experience. Wow, fantastic. Every time I interacted, the reason I'm bringing this question is, every time I interacted with you, you spend time to prepare. You spend time, whether you're hosting an event or doing a conversation, you took time to prepare. You were anxious as if you were a beginner. I meet beginners who are so casual about what they're doing, right? So in your case, I actually read the book. Sometimes I only, when I do conversation, I read a little bit, see the table of contents, and I'm okay. But because I was doing it with you, and once I started the reading the book, I couldn't put it down. Right? It was genuinely unputdownable. I just, one thing I want to agree with Sean is every time I've discussed something with you, I've discovered a new side of your personality that you're very well read, and you know a lot about a lot of things. So, that came across in the book also, that when I use the word multifaceted, even without the book, I felt that, but after reading the book, it kind of reinforced that. But let me now get into the chapter 4, which is Revolution to Religion. You call it Baba and Feda, memories of parents who created us in the places that formed us and treasured the most by many. The indelible experiences that shaped our most impressionable years. Give us a sense, because to all of us, our parents are very important. As we
Of
grow
course.
older, they become even more important. We realize how true and honest they were. We realize the sacrifices they made to make us who we are. So it's a very important chapter. So give us a sense of what's in this.
No, of course, everyone's parents are special to them because they shaped them. They gave so much for them. They gave up so much for them. They influenced them. They formed their values. So everyone's parents' roles is not to be diminished. But even if Baba and Frida were not my parents, their story would have been remarkable and is remarkable. Because here we're talking about two individuals that lived their lives for the ideals and causes that they believed. It was a different age. My mother was English, my father was Indian. They met in Oxford, both students on scholarships, both driven by idealistic visions of wanting to better the world, fight the oppression of colonialism. And my mother, being British, came back, married my father, came back and fought the British because she loved England but opposed colonialism. So this was a remarkable couple that gave up the best jobs in India to fight for the cause of its freedom. And my mother became a Gandhian Satyagrahi. My father was a rabble-rousing communist. And each had their own path, but their vision, their idealism, the root of it was the same. And later in life, when they moved on after independence and discovered their religious calling, there again, they diverged in their beliefs. My father became a New Age philosopher in Italy. My mother went on to become the highest ranked Buddhist nun in the world. And yet, as I explain in this chapter, this incredible bond remained between them of respect, of love, not in the love of young people starting out life, but the love based on huge respect. And what they actually went through was extraordinary. The huts in which I was born in Lahore, just before independence, was actually huts. And these huts were symbols of their lack of money, but also their solidarity with India's poor. And this was the Hadda where all these leftists would gather, all the people became very famous later. Gyani Zail Singh, who became prime president. Inder Kumar Gujral, who became prime minister. Sheikh Abdullah, who became the ruler of Kashmir. Hafiz Jalandhari, who became the poet laureate of Pakistan. Many artists, Satish Gujral, B.C. Sanyal, all these people gathered there, and it was all suffered enormously, made enormous sacrifices to be part of that freedom struggle. Now, what is it that drives people to live lives like that? In an age where people are acquisitive, wanting more money, more power, and yet these are people that live for the ideal. So it wasn't a story without trauma or without dramas within it. All that is, I think, beautifully captured in my book. But their lives gave me the strength to be different, take the path less traveled. They didn't take the normal path. My father's brother was a ICS sessions judge. He wanted his brother to follow him into the civil service. But my father, in fact, said, no, I give up my share of the family's feudal wealth because I believe that is capitalistic, and I start my life afresh. I will live on what I earn. This kind of idealism gave me the strength to know that even if I chose a path very different to what my parents had chosen, or what my friends in St. Stephen's in Delhi had chosen, I could make a life of it. So I entered the advertising and the film industry, which nobody in my family had done, and then pushed on beyond India and went to Europe. So that courage came from the lives of my parents. There are so many extraordinary examples of my father's psychic gifts and powers and things that he did for people. Too long to go in out here. But the fact is, there were people that left an amazing mark, not just on me, but on the lives of many. My mother was known as Mamila to a generation of Tibetan refugees, because she was the woman who looked after the refugee camps in Misamari when the Dalai Lama came over to India in 1959. And I used to be at the camps calling her Mummy, so they all started calling her Mamila. That whole generation of Tibetans that came over and their children still remember Mummy as Mamila. Even the Dalai Lama calls my mother Mamila, you know. So she was actually in one sense, the architect of Buddhism in the West by setting up institutions that trained lamas to speak English. Many other dramas, many other amazing stories in that one chapter, which I've tried to keep as concise as possible and as interesting as possible. But it's a great story, and I'm blessed to have been there, son.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Now, there are questions, and I'll take them at the end. There is a question from a comment, there's a question from Umesh Kulkarni, there's a question from Deepak Saxena. But I want to get into the chapter 5, which is Ramblings on a Beach. Beaches and Beliefs, that's what you call it. I like it, it's poetic. And you say this is a short story that you wrote about a long walk on the Juhu beach when you were very idealistic and you were 29 years old. And many of your beliefs, you say, since then has changed. They've evolved, let me say that. But why don't you give your story here? That's in that chapter, briefly.
Sorry?
Why don't you tell us the story in that chapter, Ramblings on a Beach?
Well, the story itself is a story I wrote for the Illustrated Weekly of India. It was later printed by Khushwant Singh in a collection of stories that he put together called The Best Indian Short Stories by Khushwant Singh. And I was in that. So it was so reflective of this kind of idealism, my idealistic beliefs at the time, that I put it in. And then I talked about how my beliefs have changed, and more than that, of my own spiritual journey. Because from my father's side, there was the Sikh tradition, because he is a descendant of Guru Baba Nanak, on whom he wrote a number of books, even though he went on to become a New Age philosopher. From my mother's side, there was the whole Buddhist tradition. And from my side, there was always this inquiry. I thought, different religious leaders and different religions say different things. Somebody says there's heaven and hell, somebody says there's not. Somebody says there's reincarnation, somebody says there's not. Somebody says there's destiny, somebody says there's free will. Somebody says there's one God, somebody says there's many. What is the truth? They can't all be telling us the truth because they're all saying different things. So this quest for the truth is something that I really have questioned all my life. And in that journey, I met Jiddu Krishnamurti, I read the books of Osho, I explored the philosophy of Deepak Chopra, who I also met. I met a number of gurus and teachers trying to understand what's the truth. Where did it all begin? From where did this single atom come that resulted in an explosion known as the Big Bang that created galaxies, trillions of galaxies that we can't even imagine from one minuscule atom. What gave it the power to explode? Something can't come from nothing. Where did it come from? So all these questions inform my choice. And that's what I've explored in my book. And I've shared my conclusion of what I believe today in my book. I'm not going to give that away. What I believe today, what I don't, but I'll tell you what resonates for me, whether it resonates for you or not. In my quest, this works for me. I believe that because of this, that, and where it all comes from. I've also given what I've drawn from the deepest thoughts of scientists and philosophers and teachers and rishis. It's my fruit salad of beliefs. Um, so that chapter is again very central to me because my beliefs changed over a period of time. I learned that blind trust is not always the best way to go. You can be betrayed by people who you trust the most. Um, uncles and aunties aren't always sweet people. They can turn out to be villains. You know, close family members can betray you. Anything is so. One has to be realistic as well. And my search for that, my experiences along the way, are all detailed in that chapter.
And you were very lucky. You met the Dalai Lama when you were 10. You went to, in my view, at least at that point, and maybe even now, can't say the best university. One can go to the Pathshala, and you were in the Shanti Niketan University. Now, you know, while
Tagore's University, I'll say.
Tagore's University, you're really, really lucky. Now, let me go on to the second last chapter, which is the text chapter. The last is a more illustrated, is Saving My Son. And you call that chapter, the subtext, The Wounded Soul. And you say the red flags of warning went up when my son first talked to me of suicide as he walked along Santa Monica Beach in the warmth of a setting sun. I know that was a very different phase in your life, but I would like you to take our readers and viewers through what's in this chapter.
In essence, that was the time when I was living in Hollywood. My son had just graduated from Carnegie Mellon University. He was, that is the mecca of infotech. He was on the verge of the most brilliant career in information technology at the very dawn of the information age in 1997. And at this point, he started having mental problems that began to cripple him. And he started talking of suicide. And the battle and the journey of trying to prevent my son committing suicide is what I've detailed in there, what I went into in great detail and great pain to myself because I had to relive those moments all over again. And the aftermath of his suicide, that too was equally profound and traumatic. It's important that I did that, firstly, as a catharsis to myself to come to terms with what happened. Secondly, to give people a feeling of what it is to be in that situation. Thirdly, how to deal with it. Today, fortunately, medicines are much better. There's much more hope. And so I don't want to make it look as though it's a chapter that leaves you with no hope. It doesn't. Medicines are better. We know much more. But also to understand that caregivers need as much sympathy as the afflicted, because the caregivers give up so much to care for those who need it. And they need our compassion as much as those who are afflicted. And there should be no stigma for this. There are physical ailments, there are mental ailments, and there are ways to manage them in both. And society should not look down on those conditions and make life even more difficult for the afflicted and the caregivers.
Thank you so much. And clearly we're doing in the backdrop of COVID, a lot of people have lost their friends, family, loved ones. So it is possible to grieve and it is okay to grieve, but it is also possible to heal and to move on. Of course, the memories of the loved one would always stay and they should stay, but it is possible to carry on. It's not easy. It takes effort, but it is possible. That's my learning from that chapter.
In this pandemic, Anurag, it's become loss has become the new normal. Sense of mourning has become the new normal because everyone has lost somebody they know or care about. And dealing with loss and mourning is not easy, and it has to be given its time. It needs time. It should be given its place, but it can't continue to run your life forever. Because, as I wrote in a recent article in Harper's Bazaar, The dead will not forgive those who forget to live. There are dreams to fulfill, jobs to do, places to go, um, ambitions to explore. Life eventually goes on, but we must allow for mourning, give place to it, give respect to it. And having gone through great mourning myself, for my son in particular, I know that the pain recedes with time, the scars remain forever, and we have to accept, learn to live with it, because life, in the end, has to go on.
Thank you so much. Talking to you, and when you talk of this, and this is dedicated to you. I'd say that you survived too many difficult days, and you've beaten the odds too many times to not live this life to the fullest. You've lived it to the fullest. You enjoyed each precious moment. You've lived on your own terms, with love in your heart and truth at your tongue, and it's reflected in your pen when you write this book. And whatever was out of your control, you just let it be. That's what I'd say to you. My last question about the book, and then I'll take the audience question. There are four already. There are a couple of comments. Is agony and ecstasy, ruin and resurrection, right? Hollywood devastated me. Italy and India resurrected me. All gave me dreams to remember. What comes to mind when I think of Hollywood? What comes to your mind when you think of Hollywood?
Hollywood is it's a mythical place. It's a mythical place because it's where myths are born. It's what people imagine of everything they see in what they think is Hollywood cinema. It's also a myth because none of the major studios today are actually based in Hollywood. They're all based around Hollywood. Some of them started there, but it became the brand name for American cinema around the world. What I think of Hollywood, firstly, is the great things that Hollywood gave me. A great role in the Bond film, where I became the first Indian actor to act in a Bond film, Octopussy. A wonderful film with Michael Caine called Ashanti. A television series called The Bold and the Beautiful, which is watched by over 1 billion people in 143 countries. And I was on there for a year, which gave me a worldwide fan base. All those wonderful things that Hollywood gave me. And I acted in dozens of television series also. What Hollywood took away from me was the fact that they weren't writing roles for Indians. And it was very difficult to be cast because they weren't writing roles for Indians. I was generally playing foreigners in general. And it's not the big things you do or the spectacular things you do that make a living. What make a living is consistent work, because the bills are regular. So the work has to be consistent. If the work is not consistent, it led me to absolute financial bankruptcy. So what does it take? What does it feel like for a celebrity to actually have to file for bankruptcy at the end of 2 decades in Hollywood? That experience, I think, is also very important to share, because not only in terms of how you feel, but how do you rise from that? Adversity is what brings out the best in you, or should bring out the best in you. And how India and Italy resurrected me. This is that chapter. And how I came back to England, then gathered my strength in Europe, and Europe gave me so much. But I had to rebuild my entire life. This book is about my making, breaking, and remaking as a man and a person. It's a story of a boy in Delhi who became an international star. It's a story of a man who experienced tremendous highs of stardom and yet the tragedies of bankruptcy. A man who had enormous loves and yet had lost some great women in the process. It's the story of my spiritual journey. It's the bond of my parents that inspired me and gave me many spiritual foundations. It's many things, and how how to write that down in one book without it going all over the place was my biggest challenge, which is why I've written it as a series of stories which overlap in time, but taken in their totality, give you the sum total of my life. And I hope that's one of the reasons why it's, as you call it, unputdownable.
Fantastic. And I just want to say, I want to ask you, as I said before, I bring in the audience question. You've done it all. You lived in Delhi, you lived in Bombay, you lived in Hollywood, now you live in Bombay. You have many lives in one life. I want to ask you, is there something left for Kabir Bedi to do? You've now written a book. Maybe it should be made into a movie. I don't know. But clearly, it's a very well edited book, and it keeps you hooked on. And there's honesty in it, which makes it interesting and relatable. Sometimes we're very generous with praise for ourselves, and we are very, very stingy when it comes to looking at ourselves honestly. I think you've been able to reverse that in the book.
Thank
and
you
of course, yeah. So, tell me, is there something else left to be done?
Well, I've just reinvented myself as an author. So there's yet another dimension, another life to be lived there, starting with radio and then broadcasting and advertising, theater, film, and now author. Who knows what lies ahead? But my motto has always been, the best is yet to come. And that's what I keep working towards. So who knows what form that may take? But certainly there'll be more books. And certainly I hope there'll be more films, because that's what's defined me. That's what's given me my brand in this country, in Europe, and America. So let's see where it all goes. It's a very creative, productive time of my life, and I'm enjoying it.
Thank you so much. And the cover has been, you say in your dedications at the end, of course, you start, you talk about Praveen, your wife, and, the cover has been selected by her. The photo of the cover, the photo that's gone on the cover. There's a story behind that photo, and why that photo, and why did you agree with Praveen's choice of choosing that for the cover?
When I was sort of right after the enormous success of Sanjay, and I was living in London, a place called Cheney Walk along the River Thames, and I decided to get some photographs taken by good photographers. So I said, who's the greatest photographer around? They said, Terry O'Neill. Terry O'Neill was the man who'd photographed rock stars, Elton John, the royalty. I mean, he was the Annie Leibovitz of his age. And I said, I want to get Terry O'Neill to photograph me. So it took a little using of all contacts and etc. to get to him, and he photographed me. And he took this picture among 5-6 others that he took. And he looked at it, he said, Kabir, I've taken a lot of pictures, but this one's got something special to it. And I treasured this picture, and I kept it in my collection wherever I moved in the world, from London to Hollywood, back to London, Italy, India. It always remained with me. So when Praveen picked it, I immediately agreed with that, because that's the most incredible picture that's been taken of me. And it reflected a period that I wanted to remember in my life. Also, I want to say that my book is dedicated to all young techies like my son Siddharth, as I say in my dedication. Dedicated to all young techies like my son Siddharth, and all young people who want to make the world a better place. Because it's the next generation that needs to know what happened in those times, what happened with me, what those highly complex and tumultuous relations are like to live through, what it's like to live many lives in one life. And I hope I've been able to share that, because that was the intent of my book. And I was clear that if I was going to tell it, I wasn't going to sugarcoat it. I would tell it as authentically as I could, in ways that touched your heart, in the same way that it touched mine.
Okay, thank you so much. And clearly, one thing I noticed, you also thank your dedicated staff, Liaquat Hussain, Anita Tawang, Suman Adekar, and David Nadar, amongst your family and people who inspired you.
Yeah.
And
it's very important.
Your family who provided the photo. But let me now take in some questions. I will start with Umesh Kulkarni's comment/question. You're extraordinarily handsome hero in the 70s. Why did you not take up more roles in Bollywood?
Well, the thing is, I began my Bollywood career and I had two big hits. One was Kache Dhage, one was Nagin. Kache Dhage by Raj Khosta with Vinod Khanna, and Nagin with a number of other major stars. And then the Italians came along. And once the success of my Italian series began, I left India and I went abroad for almost 30 years. So there wasn't time to do Bollywood. I did come back after the 20-year period for a while to do Khoon Bhari Maang with Rakesh Roshan. And there also I was shooting in Hawaii with Tom Selleck. And the phone rang in my Honolulu hotel room. In those days, there were no mobiles, so I picked up the phone. And it was Rakesh Roshan. He said, I want you to come and do a film in India. And I said, Rakesh, what's the matter? I mean, I knew him we'd done films as an actor before. He'd become a very successful producer and director. I said, are all the heroes on strike in India? He said, no. Thing is, in my film, the hero becomes the villain. So no hero is willing to do it. And if I put a villain into the role, all surprise will be lost. You're the only one who can look like a hero and turn out to be a villain in the end as a surprise to the people. So he persuaded me to come and he paired me opposite Rekha and it became my most successful film. So bottom line is, and then I did Feroz Khan's Yalgar. I then went back to do other things in Hollywood, came back here, did two films Akshay Kumar, two films with Rakesh Roshan, a film with Shah Rukh Khan. So in that 30-year gap, there really wasn't much I could do in Bollywood. I spent my most productive years as an actor abroad in Europe and America. So I hope that answers your question.
Yes, that was Umesh Kulkarni's question. Deepak Saxena. He says, Mr. Kabir Bedi, I'm Deepak Saxena from Delhi and presently watching your show from Aligarh, which is a small town in UP, as I was saying not to miss this show. It was yesterday only I was watching your 1992 movie, Yalgar, where you played the role of Sigal Saab, sorry. My question is, 30 years ago in that movie, you're looking as young as you're looking now. Do you give us the secret of your looks and your being youthful forever?
Well, I think positivity has a lot to do with it. But I have a little nuskha that I use, which I've been taking for the last 5-6 years, which is essentially I take haldi and dalchini, cinnamon, and take it with some honey and black pepper and a little oil for absorption. And I find this is very health-giving for me. I find it's very healthy. But overall, I've been blessed with a wonderful body by my wonderful parents, whom I can't thank enough. And I've done things along the way that energized me, but I think positivity is probably the single most important reason for still having the kind of energy that I felt when I was much younger.
Absolutely. I think your belief that tomorrow is better than today will always keep you better. And I would say that if you treat every development as an experience, you don't treat it as failure or look at it negatively, then while you feel the pain at that time, you can look forward to the future, and that can give you healing energy, so to say. Now,
also crises are points of power. Success anyone can endure. When you have crises and things fall around you, these are crossroads in life. It give you the ability to change course and get off the kind of track that you've been ambling down normally. It gives you the ability to change course and figure out what is the best option for the use of your energy and talents in other ways that might enrich you. So never see crises as moments of where all is lost and given to depression. They're points of power out of which a lot of positivity can come.
Absolutely. And let me take a question from Indu Anand. She says, your talk today has introduced me to the other side of your strong personality. Very excited to read your book, and I'm an art historian. So there's somebody called Bebet. She says, greetings from Berlin, and thank you for doing this interview, Kabirji. You have lived and worked on 3 continents. Your father was Indian, your mother English. How many languages do you speak, and what language do you see as your native language? And in what language do you curse?
Babette is a wonderful lady who follows me on social media, and is actually an author as well. I basically speak English and Hindi, and I've done films in Urdu and Punjabi and Italian, but I think in English, and I feel most at home in the language because that's been my upbringing and the kind of schools that I was sent to. But I think there's great beauty in the Italian language. Also, there's tremendous beauty in Hindi and Urdu. They're 2 of the most incredible languages in the world in terms of their richness. So, I've done films in many other languages, but entirely phonetically. I've done Malayalam films, Telugu films, entirely phonetically. Just making sure that my lips close at the right points with the right emotions so they can dub me. So, as an actor, I'm very versatile in languages. But thanks for the question. Gave me a chance to tell people how many languages I can perform.
But you still haven't answered. What do you curse in? He asked you specifically. If at all you curse.
I must say, when I curse, it's either in English or Punjabi. Because I learned Punjabi from my grandmother, but I have a lot of Punjabi friends, so I think some of the Punjabi curses are so rich that they can't be duplicated in English.
There are audiences saying, can you say a little bit in Punjabi? Not curse me or curse anyone. I'm sorry you won't do it. But say something in Punjabi.
Actually, Punjabi ਗੱਲ ਬੜੀ ਆਰਾਮ ਨਾਲ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੀ ਹੈ. ਮੇਰੀ ਨਾਨੀ ਨੇ ਮੈਨੂੰ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਸਿਖਾਈ ਸੀ ਤੇ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਭਰ ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ. ਤੁਸੀਂ, as I say in an article I just wrote to the Tribune, you can take a Punjabi out of Punjab, but you can't take the Punjab out of the Punjabi. You know? So, Punjabi ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਰਹਿੰਦੀ ਹੈ. ਉਹ ਮਤਲਬ ਮੇਰੀ ਫੈਮਿਲੀ ਦੀ ਜੜ੍ਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਮੇਰੀ ਰੂਹ ਦੀ ਜੜ੍ਹਾਂ Punjabi ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਮੇਰੇ ਨਾਲ ਰਹੇਗੀ.
Thank you so much. Mr. Rajendra Dhande is asking you, you've told us your success story, but tell us, how did Kache Dhage contribute to your life? He specifically asked you that question.
Kache Dhage was a turning point in my life again because the very first film that I did with O.P. Rajan called Halchal, which was my first release, did not do well. And then 2 other films that I did also did not do well. And Kache Dhage, where Raj Khosla picked me to play this role of a dacoit, along with Vinod Khanna, who played the dacoit that I opposed. So we were enemies in the film, but friends in real life. That film gave me my first big hit and established me as a name to reckon with. Bollywood then gave me all India fame, at least wherever Bollywood films are shown. People came to know Kabir Bedi as an actor, and it suddenly opened many doors for me. So, Kache Dhage was a real turning point for me, for which I cannot thank Raj Khosla enough for his faith in me and his judgment in picking me. And one of the things that got me the role was that both Vinod and I rode horses very well, which I learnt on the lawns of Rashtrapati Bhavan, and skipping school in Nainital and coming to ride horses around the lake. So those things that I learnt served me in some ways much better than all that I learnt in my schools. But Kache Dhage was a very important film in my life.
Thank you so much. I want to ask you there is Sean, he wants to ask you something in Bengali. Sean, go ahead and write that question. And David is saying, I really like culture. Can't understand why it didn't do well, but possibly let's focus on what did well. But I want to ask you my last question and call it a day.
Let me just say to my Bengali friend, আমি বাংলা একটু একটু জানি. I spent a year of my life in Shantiniketan, Tagore's institution, which is also in my book. So I've had many different things that shaped me and formed me in my formative years. And my memories of Shantiniketan are certainly wonderful. To be in that ambience atmosphere and to be educated in an Indian kind of way, which is what my parents intended. They wanted to take me out of the formal Christian boarding schools kind of atmosphere that was there and say, find out how India is also educated. And that gave me a great understanding of and love for rural India in particular.
Thank you so much. There's a question from Sean that I missed. He said, I enjoy comedy shows and films. What is your favorite comedy show? I really like Bob Hope, Dean Martin, Harold Lloyd. And he's also, Sean, Neil is asking you, hi Kabir, will your book be available to order from the UK?
It will be available in the UK once I get a UK publisher, which is under negotiation. As far as the comic people is concerned, I'm a great fan of the Charlie Chaplin, and I love the Buster Keaton films. And in modern times, I really love Jim Carrey as well. I thought he was a highly talented comedian. And then I love Bob Hope's one-liners. He had this great way of putting everything simply. He said, at the height of the Cold War, he said, everyone says nobody in Russia has a television. I've been to Russia. Everyone has a television. The only difference is you don't watch it. It watches you. So he had that gift of London used to have this terrible fog, pea soup fog, where you couldn't see anything. And he said, I went to London and I was walking down the street and I saw this light coming at me from the distance, and it kept getting closer and closer and closer, and suddenly I realized it was the end of my cigarette. So this is Bob Hope. Then he talked of the English weather. He said, I went to England dressed with clothes for summer, winter, or summer, spring, winter, and autumn, and I wore them all in one day. So this was his gift for one. I love Bob Hope. But Charlie Chaplin remains one of the greatest comedians because he did it without sound, and he had this amazing physical dexterity, and a sense of comic timing is unparalleled in comedy. So I'm a big Charlie Chaplin fan.
Fantastic. So I think I'd let you go. Thank you for talking to us. And the only thing that's coming to my mind as I wrap it up, you're really blessed. You had so many experiences, and you had a wonderful family life. So many people loved you, and you truly creatively fulfilled yourself. You got name, fame, and our common friend, the one who introduced us, was telling me once he was with you in some place in Italy, and how you were being mobbed, and how there was a 1 kilometer line just to meet you, and so clearly you've seen it all, and through it you remain equanimous. And possibly it's because of the early experiences you experienced, and you talk about yoga, and you talk about being at the Shantiniketan, of meeting the Dalai Lama when you were 11. So clearly all those experiences have shaped you. But tell me, how do you deal with, when somebody is being, we live in the era of social media. 20, 30, 40 years back, there was no social media. It is so easy to slander someone. It's so easy to, spread propaganda. So how does one deal when somebody is wrong? Then how can one put that back and move forward and go on and do what he or she has to do?
One of the things you learn, Anurag, is that in this profession, all kinds of things are going to be said to you and about you. You can't correct them all. You just have to hope that at the end of the day, truth will out, that the reality will reach people. Some of the things said about me were not cleared up. I've cleared a lot of those up in my book. Many of the things that were said about me were cleared up in time. So you have to be slightly thick-skinned. Don't be oversensitive. There are always nuts out there. There are always people who want to spread untruth. Counter it with positivity is all I say. Don't waste your time dealing with negativity because, frankly, I've realized that time is the biggest resource we have. And it's not a matter of being right or wrong. It's being able to use your time in the most fulfilling way possible to make life as beautiful and wondrous and magical as it should be. Together with all the suffering we go through, together with all that we experience as human beings. But let us not lose the wonder of life and the need to put our creative selves in forward and celebrate life for what this great gift has been given to us by the universe.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kabir Bedi, for talking to us.
Thank you, Annurag.
I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and clearly from the number of questions and number of comments that have come in, it's been at least interactive. Whatever audience has been on it, they've enjoyed it. I encourage everyone, it'd be nice if you can hold a copy of your book and hold it for the viewers. I have one.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for asking me. Yes. This is my book, Stories I Must Tell, The Emotional Life of an Actor. Many of your questions will be answered in my book, and much of what I say in the book will make you ask even more questions whose answers may actually help you if you find those answers within yourself.
Thank you so much. I clearly enjoyed reading the book, and I did think about a lot of things, some mentionable, some not mentionable. But clearly, it's a book that is unputdownable. Once you start reading it, go and get it, and it may help you look at your own life in a more objective way. That's what I'd say. Thank you, Mr. Kabir Bedi. We wish you luck.
Thank you, Annurag. Thank you so much.
And more writing and more experiences. God bless you. Have a great weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Annurag. Enjoyed that greatly.